Montana Territory, 1888. The wheel gave out with a crack that echoed across the empty prairie like a gunshot. Margaret Sterling felt her heart drop as the wagon lurched hard to the right, nearly throwing her from the seat. She managed to grip the reins tight enough to keep the horses steady, but the damage was done. The rear wheel lay in pieces behind her, splintered wood scattered across the rutted trail. She climbed down carefully, her boots sinking into the soft autumn grass. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills, and the temperature was already dropping. She had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, and she was miles from town. Miles from anywhere, really, except the ranch she could see in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin gray line against the darkening sky. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and studied the broken wheel. Her uncle had left her this wagon along with the ranch property, but he had not left her much knowledge about repairs. She was a woman alone on the frontier, and moments like this reminded her just how alone she really was. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A rider was approaching from the direction of that distant ranch, moving at an easy canter across the prairie. As he drew closer, she could make out details. Tall in the saddle, broad shoulders, a brown cowboy hat pulled low against the setting sun. He reined in a few yards away and dismounted in one smooth motion. He was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, with dark brown wavy hair that touched his collar, and a clean-shaven jaw that looked strong enough to be carved from stone. His blue eyes assessed the situation quickly, then settled on her face with an expression that was neither intrusive nor dismissive. Just steady, watchful. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and calm. "Looks like you've got trouble." "The wheel broke," Margaret said, keeping her chin up despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "I can manage. I just need to get to town for repairs." He walked past her to examine the damage, crouching down beside the scattered pieces of wood. After a moment, he stood and shook his head. "This wheel's done. You're not going anywhere tonight." He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "Storm's coming in. You can see the clouds building west. You'll want shelter." Margaret followed his gaze. He was right. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, moving fast. She had been so focused on the wheel that she had not noticed. "I can't impose," she said automatically. "If you could just help me get the wagon off the trail, I'll wait here until morning." "In a storm?" His tone was matter-of-fact, not judgmental. "That's not safe, ma'am. My ranch is just over that rise. You're welcome to shelter there until we can get you sorted out." She hesitated. He was a stranger, but he was also right about the storm. And she could feel the wind picking up already, carrying the sharp scent of coming rain. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Elijah Chambers. I own the ranch you can see from here. Used to be cavalry, stationed at Fort Ellis before I mustered out and bought this land." He said it simply, without pride or false modesty. Just facts. "And you are?" "Margaret Sterling. I inherited a property east of here from my uncle. I've been living there since spring." She did not mention that she was a widow, that she had lost her husband 3 years ago and had been struggling alone ever since. That was her business. Elijah nodded. "Sterling property. I know it. Good land. Your uncle was a fair man." looked at the wagon again. Tell you what, I'll unhitch your horses and bring them to my place, along with whatever supplies you need for the night. In the morning, I can ride to town and see about getting you a new wheel. Fair enough? It was more than fair. It was generous. Margaret found herself nodding before she could think of a reason to refuse. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I appreciate the help. Just being neighborly, ma'am. He moved to the horses, his movements efficient and confident. Within minutes, he had them unhitched and tied to his own mount. He helped her gather a few essentials from the wagon, then gestured toward his horse. You'll ride with me. It's not far. Margaret had not ridden double with a man since her husband died. The thought made her uncomfortable, but there was no other choice. Elijah mounted first, then reached down to help her up. His grip was strong, but not rough, and he settled her in front of him with careful respect for propriety. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest at her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing. They rode in silence. Margaret tried not to think about how long it had been since she had felt safe with a man, since she had allowed herself to lean on anyone. Her husband had been gentle and kind, but he was gone. After his death, she had learned to be hard, to trust no one, to expect nothing. It was the only way to survive. Elijah's ranch came into view as they crested the hill. It was modest but well kept. A sturdy wooden house with a covered porch, a barn that looked freshly painted, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the fading light. Smoke still rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in one window. It looked like a home, not just a house. The difference struck her immediately. He helped her down, then led the horses to the barn while she stood uncertainly on the porch. When he returned, he opened the door and gestured for her to enter. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Make yourself comfortable. The interior was simple, but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire already burning low in the grate. A wooden table and chairs sat near the kitchen area, and a single doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom. Everything was neat, orderly, and clearly the domain of a man who lived alone, but took pride in his space. I'll get the fire built up, Elijah said, moving to the hearth. Coffee's on the stove if you want some. Help yourself to anything you need. Margaret poured herself a cup of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. She watched him work, the easy competence in the way he arranged the logs and coaxed the flames higher. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times, who knew exactly what he was doing. It was oddly comforting. The storm hit just as full darkness fell. Rain drummed against the roof in a steady downpour, and wind howled around the corners of the house. Margaret sat at the table, nursing her coffee, while Elijah prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that did not feel awkward or forced. You said you inherited the Sterling property, Elijah said finally, leaning back in his chair. How long have you been out here? Since April. My uncle passed last winter and left me the land in his will. I needed a fresh start, so I came west. She did not elaborate. He did not push. That's hard country for a woman alone, he observed. Sterling Place needs work. Fences, barn repairs. Your uncle let things slide in his final years. I'm managing, Margaret said, more defensively than she intended. I've learned how to handle most of it. I'm sure you have. His tone held no condescension. Just meant to say, if you need help, I'm close by. That's what neighbors do. She studied him across the table. His face was weathered but kind. His eyes direct but not invasive. He seemed genuine, which made her suspicious. In her experience, men who offered help usually wanted something in return. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. Elijah did not seem offended by the question. He considered it for a moment, then shrugged. "I've been alone since I mustered out 2 years ago. Bought this place with my discharge pay, and a little I saved. It's good land, good life. But it's lonely sometimes. Having neighbors who look out for each other makes it less lonely. That's all." It was an honest answer. Margaret found herself believing him, which was strange because she had stopped believing in the kindness of strangers a long time ago. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the shelter. For being decent. You're welcome to stay as long as the storm lasts. I'll sleep in the barn tonight, so you can have the bed." "I can't take your bed," Margaret protested. "I'll be fine by the fire." "Ma'am, I've slept in worse places than a clean barn. You'll take the bed, and that's the end of it." His tone was firm, but not unkind. He stood and carried their dishes to the wash basin. "Get some rest. Morning will come early." He left before she could argue further, pulling on his coat and heading out into the rain. Margaret sat alone in the warm house, listening to the storm rage outside, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something close to peace. It was unsettling. She did not trust peace. Peace never lasted. But tonight, exhausted and stranded, she allowed herself to accept it. She banked the fire, washed her face in the basin, and retreated to the small bedroom. The bed was simple but clean, and the blanket smelled faintly of cedar. She lay down and closed her eyes, and despite everything, she slept. Morning came with pale gray light filtering through the window. The storm had passed, leaving the prairie washed clean and glistening with moisture. Margaret woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then she remembered. The broken wheel. Elijah Chambers. The storm. She dressed quickly and emerged from the bedroom to find the fire already burning and coffee made. Elijah was outside. She could see him through the window, tending to the horses in the barn. She poured herself coffee and stood at the window, watching him work. He looked different in the morning light. Younger, maybe, or just less guarded. His movements were efficient as he fed and watered the animals, his shoulders broad and strong under his shirt. Margaret caught herself staring and looked away, flustered. She had no business noticing such things. She was here because of circumstance, nothing more. Elijah came in a few minutes later, stamping mud off his boots. "Morning," he said with a nod. "Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." Margaret set down her cup. "I should get back to my wagon. If you could just help me with the horses, I can wait there for someone from town." "Already sent word to town," Elijah said, pouring his own coffee. "My hand rode out at first light. Wheelwright should be out this afternoon to look at your wagon. In the meantime, you're welcome to wait here where it's comfortable." Margaret felt a flash of irritation. He had taken charge without asking her. But the irritation faded quickly because what he said made sense, and she could not deny the practicality of it. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "But thank you. Like I said, neighbors help each other." He sat at the table and gestured for her to join him. "Tell me about the Sterling place. What are you planning to do with it?" They talked through the morning. Margaret found herself opening up more than she intended, telling him about her plans to improve the ranch, to build it into something sustainable. Elijah listened carefully, offering suggestions when asked, but never pushing his opinions. He knew the land, knew ranching, and his advice was sound. "You'll need help come spring," he said finally. "Roundup, branding, all of it. I can lend you a hand or two if you need." "I can pay," Margaret said immediately. She would not accept charity. "I know you can. Just offering." He stood and stretched. "Want to see the rest of the place? I've got time before the wheelwright shows up." They walked the property together. Elijah showed her his cattle operation, his vegetable garden, the improvements he had made to the barn. He talked about his time in the cavalry, about learning to ranch after years of military life. Margaret listened and asked questions, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. As they walked, Margaret noticed details. The way he opened gates carefully, the gentle way he handled his horse, the respect he showed for the land. He was a careful man, a thoughtful man. It made her curious about him in ways she had not been curious about anyone in a long time. The wheelwright arrived in the afternoon, a grizzled old man named Henry, who examined the broken wheel with the air of a doctor studying a patient. "Can fix it," he announced finally. "But it'll take a few days. Need to order parts from Helena." Margaret's heart sank. A few days. She could not stay here that long. It would not be proper. "How much to rush it?" she asked. Henry named a price that made her wince. It was more than she could afford right now, not with winter coming and supplies to buy. She bit her lip, trying to think of alternatives. "I'll cover the rush fee," Elijah said quietly. "You can pay me back when it's convenient." "I can't let you do that," Margaret protested. "You've done enough already. Consider it a loan then. No interest. Pay when you're able." He turned to Henry. "Rush it. She needs to get home." Henry nodded and left to retrieve the wagon. Margaret stood on the porch, torn between gratitude and frustration. She hated owing anyone, hated accepting help, but she also knew when she had no choice. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll pay you back. Every cent." "I know you will." Elijah looked at her steadily. "You're a proud woman, Margaret Sterling. There's nothing wrong with that. But pride won't keep you warm in winter or fix a broken wagon. Sometimes accepting help is just smart, not weak." His words struck home. Margaret had been so focused on proving she could survive alone that she had forgotten what it meant to have neighbors, to be part of a community. Maybe that was something she needed to relearn. "You're right," she admitted. "I'm not used to depending on anyone." "You're not depending. You're accepting help from a neighbor. There's a difference." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. "Come on. Let's get some supper started. You can tell me more about those plans for your ranch." They spent the evening by the fire, talking and planning. Elijah had ideas for improving the Sterling property, practical suggestions about water management and herd rotation. Margaret listened and contributed her own thoughts, surprised by how natural it felt to plan with him, to think of their ranches as part of a larger whole. As darkness fell and the fire burned low, Margaret realized She had not thought about her husband all day. The guilt hit her immediately. She had loved him, grieved him, promised herself she would never love anyone again. Yet here she was, sitting with another man, laughing at his stories, feeling something she had not felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple pleasure of not being alone. "You got quiet," Elijah observed. "Something wrong?" "Just thinking," Margaret said, "about everything that's changed. 6 months ago, I was living in Philadelphia, working as a seamstress, barely scraping by. Now I'm here, trying to run a ranch I barely know how to manage. It's overwhelming sometimes." "Change is hard," Elijah agreed. "After the cavalry, I felt lost for a while. Didn't know who I was without the uniform. Took time to figure out that I could be something else. Someone else. But I like who I am now better than who I was then." "What made you leave the cavalry?" Margaret asked. Elijah was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Saw too much death, too much fighting. We were supposed to be keeping peace, but mostly we were just enforcing orders that didn't make much sense. I did my duty, but I couldn't keep doing it, not without losing something important inside." It was the most personal thing he had shared, and Margaret understood what it cost him to say it. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "That can't be easy to talk about." "It's not. But you shared with me today, so I figure I owe you the same." He stood and added another log to the fire. "You can take the bed again tonight. I'll be fine in the barn." "Elijah," Margaret said, stopping him before he could leave. "Thank you. For everything. For being kind. For not expecting anything in return. I haven't met many men like you." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he nodded. "Good night, Margaret. Sleep well." After he left, Margaret sat by the fire a little longer, thinking. She had come west to escape her past, to start over, to prove she could survive alone. But maybe surviving was not the same as living. Maybe there was room in her new life for more than just survival. Maybe there was room for connection, for friendship, for trust. She went to bed with those thoughts spinning in her mind, and for the second night in a row, she slept deeply and woke rested. The next morning brought news. Elijah's ranch hand returned from town with more than just word about the wheel. He brought a warning. A man named Elias Kincaid had been asking questions about the Sterling property, claiming he had a legal right to it. Kincaid was known in the area as a con artist who used legal manipulation to steal land from vulnerable owners. He had set his sights on Margaret's ranch. Margaret felt cold fear settle in her stomach. "What kind of legal right?" she asked. "My uncle left me the property in a clear will. There's no dispute." "Kincaid's claiming your uncle owed him money," the ranch hand explained. "Says he's got a promissory note that gives him claim to the land if the debt wasn't paid before your uncle died." "That's a lie," Margaret said hotly. "My uncle would never have borrowed from a man like that." "Probably is a lie," Elijah agreed. "But Kincaid's got connections, knows how to work the system. He'll take you to court, drag it out, try to force you to sell just to avoid the legal fees." Margaret sat down heavily at the table. This was exactly the kind of trouble she had feared, the kind that could destroy everything she had tried to build. "What do I do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "You fight," Elijah said firmly. "But you don't fight alone. Kincaid's smart, but he's also a coward. He preys on people he thinks are isolated, vulnerable. If you've got support, witnesses, people willing to stand up for you in court, he'll back down. It's not worth his effort if it's going to be a real fight. I don't have that kind of support, Margaret said. I barely know anyone here. You know me, Elijah said. And I know people. We'll make sure Kincaid knows you're not alone in this. Over the next few days, while Margaret waited for her wagon to be repaired, Elijah took her to meet neighboring ranchers. He introduced her to families who had known her uncle, who respected his memory and were willing to support his niece. Margaret was overwhelmed by the kindness, by the willingness of these frontier people to stand with a stranger against a common threat. But it was the evenings that mattered most. Each night, Margaret and Elijah sat by the fire, going over documents, planning strategy, talking about how to protect her land. They worked as partners, equals, neither one dominating the conversation. Elijah respected her intelligence and her instincts, and Margaret found herself trusting his judgment more and more. One evening, as they pored over her uncle's old papers, Elijah's hand brushed against hers on the table. It was accidental, brief, but it sent a jolt through Margaret that she could not ignore. She looked up and found him watching her, something unspoken in his eyes. The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with possibility. Margaret, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered in her chest. What? I like having you here, more than I should, probably. These past few days, having you at my table, talking with you, working with you, it's made me realize how lonely I've been, how much I've been just going through the motions. He paused, searching for words. I know this isn't the time, with everything you're dealing with, but I wanted you to know I care about what happens to you, not just as a neighbor. Margaret could not breathe. She had known, on some level, that something was growing between them. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, immediate, terrifying. Elijah, I lost my husband 3 years ago. I loved him. I don't know if I can love anyone else. I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not asking you to be ready, Elijah said gently. I'm just being honest. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'll be here. As a friend, as a neighbor, as whatever you want me to be. No pressure, no expectations. His words broke something open inside her, something that had been locked away since her husband's death. She felt tears prick her eyes. You make it sound so simple, she whispered. But I'm scared. I'm scared of losing someone again. I'm scared of trusting and being wrong. I'm scared of everything. Elijah reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. Fear makes sense. You've been hurt. But hiding from fear means hiding from everything else too. Joy. Connection. Love. Is that really what you want? Margaret looked down at their joined hands. His palm was calloused from work, strong and capable. It felt solid, real, safe. I don't know what I want, she admitted, except that I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is. Then we'll take it slow, Elijah said. One day at a time. No rushing, no pushing. Just seeing where it goes. Can you do that? She met his eyes and saw patience there, understanding, and something deeper that made her chest ache. "I can try," she said. He smiled, that warm transformation again, and squeezed her hand gently before letting go. "That's all I'm asking." The wagon was finally ready 4 days after Margaret's wheel had broken. Henry delivered it in the morning. The new wheel fitted perfectly, and the whole rig checked over for safety. Margaret stood beside it, feeling oddly reluctant to leave. She had come to treasure these days at Elijah's ranch, the quiet companionship, the feeling of not being alone. "I'll follow you back to your place," Elijah said, already saddling his horse. "Make sure you get there safe." "You don't have to do that," Margaret said automatically, even though she wanted him to. "I know, but I'm going to anyway." They rode in comfortable silence, the autumn sun warm on their backs. Margaret's property came into view, and she saw it with new eyes. The house needed paint. The barn needed repairs. The fences were sagging in places. But it was hers, her fresh start, her future, and maybe, just maybe, it did not have to be a future she faced entirely alone. Elijah helped her unload the wagon, checked the house to make sure everything was secure, and then stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking like he wanted to say something, but did not know how. "Come by any time," Margaret said, "for coffee, or if you need anything." "I mean it." "I will," Elijah promised. "And you do the same. My door's always open." He mounted his horse and rode away, but Margaret knew he would be back. And she knew that when he came, she would be glad to see him. That was progress. That was hope. That was something worth fighting for. The trouble with Elias Kincaid started 2 weeks later. He appeared at Margaret's ranch unannounced. A tall man in expensive clothes who smiled too much and spoke in a voice like oil. He brought papers, legal documents, that claimed her uncle had owed him $5,000 and had put up the ranch as collateral. "This is fraud," Margaret said coldly, standing on her porch with a rifle in her hands. She had learned to shoot, had practiced every day since moving west. She was not helpless. "My uncle kept meticulous records. There's no debt." "Nevertheless," Kincaid said smoothly, "I have documentation. The court will decide. But these things can take years, Mrs. Sterling. Legal fees alone could bankrupt you. Wouldn't it be simpler to just sell me the property for a fair price? Save yourself the trouble?" "Get off my land," Margaret said, "and don't come back." Kincaid's smile never wavered. "I'll see you in court." He left, and Margaret stood shaking with anger and fear. She knew he was lying, but she also knew that lies could win in court if they were told convincingly enough. She needed help. She needed Elijah. She rode to his ranch that afternoon and found him working in the barn. The moment he saw her face, he set down his tools and came to her. "What happened?" Margaret told him everything. Elijah's expression grew hard, dangerous. "Kincaid made a mistake," he said. "He came to my place yesterday, tried the same thing with me. Said I owed money to some bank he supposedly bought the debt from. But I paid off my ranch in full when I bought it. Got all the paperwork to prove it. This is his pattern. He's running the same con on multiple ranchers at once." "Can we stop him?" Margaret asked. "We can try. I've already sent word to the territorial marshal. He's investigating Kincaid for fraud in 3 other counties. If we can get enough ranchers together who've been targeted, we can build a case. Get him arrested before he gets near a courtroom." Over the next few weeks, Margaret and Elijah worked together to organize the other ranchers. They held meetings, gathered documentation, built alliances. It was exhausting work. But Margaret felt stronger every day. She was not alone. She had Elijah by her side, and she had a community that was willing to fight for justice. And through it all, the connection between them deepened. Margaret found herself looking forward to seeing Elijah every day. Found herself thinking about him at night when she was alone. He was patient, never pushing, but she could see the way he looked at her. The affection in his eyes, the careful hope that maybe she would let him in. One evening, as they stood on her porch watching the sunset, Elijah turned to her. "Margaret, I need to ask you something." "What?" Her heart was already racing. "When this is over, when Kincaid's dealt with, and you're safe, would you consider letting me court you? Properly, I mean. Not just as neighbors or friends, but as something more." Margaret looked at him, this strong, quiet man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. He had asked for nothing, demanded nothing, just patiently waited for her to heal. And she realized, standing there in the fading light, that she had healed. Not completely, maybe never completely, but enough. Enough to take a chance. Enough to risk her heart again. "Yes," she said softly. "I would consider that." Elijah's face transformed with joy. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle, questioning. She let him take her hand, let him pull her close. And when he kissed her, soft and careful, she felt something shift inside her. Something that had been frozen for 3 years finally thawed. She kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart pound as hard as her own. When they parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll take care of you," he whispered. "I promise." "I know," Margaret said, "but I can take care of myself too. What I want is a partner, someone who stands beside me, not in front of me." Elijah smiled. "That's exactly what I'm offering." The territorial marshal arrived in late October, just as the first snow was beginning to threaten. He was a hard-eyed man named Patterson, who had been tracking Kincaid's activities across 3 territories. With the evidence that Elijah and Margaret had gathered, along with testimony from a dozen other ranchers, Patterson had enough to make an arrest. They found Kincaid in town, sitting in the saloon like he owned the place. Patterson walked in with 2 deputies and read the charges: fraud, forgery, attempted theft. Kincaid tried to run and was tackled before he made it to the door. As they dragged him out in handcuffs, he caught Margaret's eye through the saloon window. His expression was venomous, full of rage at being outmaneuvered. Margaret felt nothing but relief. It was over. Her ranch was safe. She had won. That evening, the town held a celebration at the church hall. All the ranchers who had banded together came, along with their families. There was food and music, and for the first time since moving west, Margaret felt like she belonged. These people had fought for her, stood with her, accepted her as one of their own. Elijah found her near the dessert table, looking overwhelmed. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine. Just taking it all in. I never expected this. Any of it." "You earned it," Elijah said. "You stood up for yourself, fought for your land, brought people together. You're part of this community now. That matters." Margaret looked around at the smiling faces, the children running between tables, the old ranchers arguing good-naturedly in the corner. This was home. Really home. "Thank you," she said to Elijah. "For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "Partners," he reminded her. "That's what we are." They danced that night, slowly and carefully, Margaret's head resting against Elijah's shoulder. She could feel every eye in the room on them, knew what people were thinking. The widow and the rancher. It would be the talk of the territory for weeks. But she did not care. For the first time in years, she was happy. Truly, deeply happy. As they swayed to the music, Elijah leaned down and whispered in her ear, "I love you, Margaret Sterling. I think I have since the day your wagon wheel broke, and you stood there trying to convince me you didn't need help." Margaret pulled back enough to look at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. She had known, but hearing him say it made it real. Made it something she had to respond to. "I love you too," she said, surprised by how easily the words came. "I didn't think I could love anyone again, but you made me believe it was possible." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the church hall, with half the territory watching. Margaret heard a few gasps, a few laughs, and then someone started clapping. The applause spread through the room, and when they broke apart, both blushing, people were grinning at them with genuine happiness. Mrs. Patterson, the marshal's wife, came over and hugged Margaret. "It's about time," she said with a wink. "We've all been waiting for you two to figure it out." The celebration went late into the night. By the time Elijah drove Margaret home in her wagon, the stars were out and the temperature had dropped. Margaret sat close to him on the wagon seat, her head on his shoulder, feeling content in a way she had forgotten was possible. At her ranch, Elijah helped her down and walked her to the porch. "I should let you get some rest," he said, clearly reluctant to leave. "Stay," Margaret said impulsively. Then, seeing his expression, she clarified. "Just for coffee. I'm not ready for you to go yet." They sat at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking until the early hours of morning. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Elijah told her about losing his parents young, about joining the cavalry to have a purpose. Margaret told him about her marriage, about the love she had shared with her husband, and the grief that had nearly destroyed her when he died. "I feel guilty sometimes," Margaret admitted, "for loving you, like I'm betraying his memory." Elijah reached across the table and took her hand. "Love isn't betrayal. Your husband would want you to be happy, would want you to live, not just survive. And loving me doesn't mean you loved him any less. The heart has room for more than one love." His words eased something inside her, a knot of guilt she had been carrying for months. "You're right," she said softly. "He would want me to be happy. And I am. With you, I'm happy. Then that's all that matters." Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with fierce winds and heavy snow. Margaret's ranch was isolated by the storms, but she was not alone. Elijah made the journey between their properties every few days, checking on her, helping with chores, making sure she had enough supplies. On Christmas morning, he arrived with a small wrapped package. Margaret invited him in, embarrassed that she had nothing to give him in return. But when she opened the package, she found a simple gold band on a chain. "It was my mother's," Elijah said quietly. She died when I was 12. It's the only thing I have of hers. I want you to have it. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Elijah, I can't take this. It's too precious. That's why I want you to have it. Because you're precious to me. He took the chain and fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. Margaret, I know we haven't been courting long, and I know you need time, but I need you to know my intentions. When you're ready, when the time is right, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Margaret touched the ring resting against her heart. She looked at Elijah, this good man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most, who had been patient and kind and steady. She thought about her future, about the ranch, about the long winters and the hard work ahead, and she realized she did not want to face any of it without him. I'm ready now, she said. I don't need more time. I know what I want. I want you. Elijah's expression transformed with hope and joy. Are you sure? I'm sure. Margaret stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. Ask me. Ask me properly. Elijah took both her hands in his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. Margaret Sterling, will you marry me? Will you let me stand beside you for the rest of our lives? Will you build a future with me? Yes, Margaret said, the word coming out is almost a laugh. Yes, I'll marry you. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and passionate, holding nothing back. Margaret kissed him back with equal fervor. 3 years of loneliness and grief finally releasing their hold on her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elijah pressed his forehead to hers. I'll take care of you, he whispered. I swear it. I know, and I'll take care of you too. That's what partners do. They were married 3 weeks later, in the same church hall where they had danced. The ceremony was simple, attended by all the neighbors who had become friends. Margaret wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Patterson, and Elijah wore his best suit, looking nervous and happy in equal measure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah kissed Margaret like she was air, and he had been drowning. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Patterson cried. Marshal Patterson shook Elijah's hand with a grin, and Margaret felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held at Elijah's ranch, which would now be their home. Margaret's property would be maintained, used for additional grazing land, but they would live together at his place. Their place, now. The house was filled with laughter and music, with food and dancing, with the warmth of community and celebration. As evening fell and guests began to leave, Elijah and Margaret stood on the porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon disappeared over the hill, Elijah turned to his bride. Alone at last, he said with a smile. Margaret laughed, feeling giddy and nervous and excited all at once. What do we do now? Now, Elijah said, taking her hand. We start our life together. He led her inside, to the bedroom that was now theirs. Margaret felt suddenly shy, aware of what came next, unsure despite her previous marriage. But Elijah was patient, gentle, giving her time to adjust. He kissed her softly, his hands careful and respectful. "There's no rush," he murmured against her lips. "We have the rest of our lives." But Margaret did not want to wait. She had been alone for too long, had denied herself connection and touch and love. She wanted all of it now, wanted to claim this man as her husband in every way that mattered. She kissed him deeper, letting her actions show what words could not express. Elijah responded with barely restrained passion, his control slipping as she pressed closer. His hands slid into her hair, and he whispered her name like a prayer. Margaret felt safe and cherished, and desired all at once, felt years of grief and fear finally releasing their hold. They spent their wedding night discovering each other, learning what brought pleasure and comfort, building the intimacy that would sustain them through years ahead. And when Margaret finally fell asleep in Elijah's arms, she felt complete in a way she had never expected to feel again. Morning came with pale winter sunlight streaming through the window. Margaret woke slowly, feeling the solid warmth of Elijah beside her, his arm draped over her waist. She turned to look at him, studying his face in sleep, the strong jaw, the dark lashes, the small scar above his eyebrow that she had never noticed before. This was her husband, her partner, her love. Elijah stirred and opened his eyes, smiling when he saw her watching him. "Morning, Mrs. Chambers." Margaret felt a thrill at the name. She was Mrs. Chambers now. She had a family again. "Morning, Mr. Chambers." He pulled her closer and kissed her forehead. "How do you feel?" "Happy," Margaret said simply. "Happier than I've been in years. Maybe happier than I've ever been." "Good. Because I plan to keep you that way for the rest of our lives." They spent the morning in bed, talking and laughing, making plans for the future. They would combine their ranches, build something bigger and stronger together. They would hire help come spring, expand the herd, maybe even think about children someday. The possibilities felt endless. Eventually they rose and dressed, both moving around the kitchen with easy familiarity. Elijah made coffee while Margaret prepared breakfast. They worked in comfortable silence, passing each other with small touches and soft smiles. This was what marriage should be, Margaret thought. Partnership and respect and love, all woven together into something stronger than any single person could be alone. After breakfast, they walked the property together, checking fences and livestock, making plans for spring improvements. The snow crunched under their boots, and their breath hung in the cold air, but Margaret felt warm, content. "Home. I want to thank you," she said suddenly. Elijah looked at her quizzically. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for not pushing, for letting me heal in my own time, for showing me that it was possible to love again." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "You gave me my life back, Elijah. I was just existing before, just going through the motions, but you made me want to live again." Elijah cupped her face gently, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "You did that yourself. I just reminded you of what was already inside you. Your strength, your courage, your capacity to love. That was all you." "Then we helped each other," Margaret said. "And we'll keep helping each other. That's what this is. Two people making each other better." "Exactly." He kissed her, soft and sweet, I love you, Margaret Chambers. I love you too. They stood together on the snow-covered prairie, the winter wind whipping around them, and Margaret marveled at how much her life had changed in just 6 months. She had come west broken and alone, determined to prove she needed no one. But she had found something better than independence. She had found partnership. She had found love. She had found home. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Elijah and Margaret worked side by side, managing both properties, caring for the livestock, preparing for the harsh winter ahead. They developed small rituals that became the foundation of their marriage. Morning coffee together before starting chores, evening time by the fire, reading or talking, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Sundays spent visiting neighbors or hosting small dinners. Margaret discovered she loved being married to Elijah. He was considerate and thoughtful, always thinking of small ways to make her life easier. He left notes for her when he had to ride out early. He brought her wildflowers when he found them on the range. He listened when she talked about her ideas for improving the ranch, treating her opinions as equally valuable as his own. And Elijah seemed equally content. Margaret caught him watching her sometimes with an expression of wonder, as if he could not quite believe she was real. He told her frequently that he loved her, never letting a day pass without the words. He held her every night as they fell asleep, his arms a safe harbor against the world. One February morning, Margaret woke feeling unwell. She tried to hide it, not wanting to worry Elijah, but he noticed immediately. "You look pale," he said, concerned. "Are you sick?" "Just tired," Margaret said, though the wave of nausea that swept over her suggested otherwise. She made it to the wash basin just in time, and Elijah held her hair back gently while she was sick. When it passed, he helped her back to bed and brought her water. "Should I ride for the doctor?" "No," Margaret said quickly. "I think I know what this is." Elijah stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "You mean?" "I think so. It's early yet, but the signs are there." Margaret touched her stomach tentatively. "We're going to have a baby." Elijah's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, joy, fear, and finally settling on pure happiness. "A baby," he breathed. "We're going to have a baby." He sat on the bed and pulled Margaret into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "I'm going to be a father. Are you happy?" Margaret asked, suddenly uncertain. They had talked about children eventually, but this felt soon. They had been married less than 2 months. "Happy?" Elijah pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Margaret, I'm more than happy. I'm overwhelmed, terrified, grateful, everything all at once." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We're going to be a family." Margaret felt tears slip down her own cheeks. A family. After 3 years of being alone, of believing that chapter of her life was closed forever, she was going to have a family again. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not a good mother? What if—" "Stop," Elijah said gently. "Whatever happens, we face it together. You're not alone, Margaret. You'll never be alone again. We're partners, remember? In everything." His words settled her fears. He was right. They would face this together, just like they faced everything else. Partners, she agreed. In everything. The news spread quickly through the community. Neighbors came by with congratulations and advice, with hand-me-down baby clothes and offers of help. Mrs. Patterson visited weekly, bringing food and checking on Margaret's health. The women of the territory embraced her fully now, welcoming her into the circle of mothers and wives. Elijah became even more protective, insisting Margaret rest more, do less heavy work. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from love and concern. And truthfully, she appreciated having someone care for her this way. She had been alone for so long that having someone worry about her welfare felt like a gift. As winter gave way to early spring, Margaret's condition became more obvious. Her dresses grew tight, and Elijah built her a rocking chair for the porch so she could sit comfortably while watching the ranch work. She spent hours there, one hand on her growing belly, feeling the baby move and thinking about the future. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Margaret turned to Elijah. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me so quickly? Taking on all of this?" Elijah looked at her like she had spoken nonsense. "Regret? Margaret, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. The day your wagon wheel broke was the luckiest day of my life. I got to meet you, got to know you, got to fall in love with you. And now we're building a family together. How could I possibly regret any of that? I just worry sometimes," Margaret admitted, "that you're giving up too much. Your freedom, your quiet bachelor life. Now you've got a wife and a baby on the way and I wouldn't change a single thing," Elijah interrupted firmly. "That quiet bachelor life was lonely, Margaret. I was just going through the motions, waiting for something without even knowing what I was waiting for. Then, you came along, and everything made sense. You're not taking anything from me. You're giving me everything that matters." Margaret felt the now familiar burn of happy tears. Pregnancy had made her emotional, quick to cry over small kindnesses and tender words. "I love you," she said. "So much it scares me sometimes." "I know the feeling." Elijah pulled her close as her belly would allow. "But we don't have to be scared anymore. We've got each other. We've got this ranch. We've got a baby coming. We've got a whole future ahead of us. And I promise you, Margaret, I will spend every day of that future making sure you know how loved you are." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The spring breeze carried the scent of new grass and wildflowers. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. The ranch was thriving under their combined management, the herds healthy, the land producing, their partnership creating something stronger than either could have built alone. Margaret thought about how far she had come since that day her wagon wheel broke. She had been so determined to do everything alone, to prove she did not need anyone. But she had learned something more valuable than independence. She had learned that accepting help was not weakness, that letting someone love you was not surrendering. That partnership made you stronger, not weaker. She thought about her first husband, about the love they had shared, and the grief that had consumed her when he died. She would always carry him in her heart, would always be grateful for the years they had together. But she had learned that the heart was capable of expanding, of loving more than once, of finding joy again after loss. Loving Elijah did not diminish what she had shared with her first husband. It honored it, proved that love was worth the risk, even when you knew how much it could hurt. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked softly. "How lucky I am," Margaret said. How grateful I am that my wagon broke down that day. How thankful I am that you were the one who found me. Fate, Elijah said with a smile. Or maybe just luck. Either way, I'm grateful too. They stayed on the porch until full darkness fell, and the stars came out, bright and clear, in the Montana sky. Then, Elijah helped Margaret to her feet, and they went inside together, to the home they had built, to the life they were creating, to the future that stretched out before them full of promise and hope. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect spring weather. Elijah had to ride out to check the far pastures, a job that would take most of the day. Margaret walked him to his horse, straightening his collar and adjusting his hat with wifely care. Be careful, she said, as she always did. Always am, he replied, as he always did. He kissed her thoroughly, then placed a gentle hand on her belly. Take care of yourself and our baby. I'll be home before dark. Margaret watched him ride away, one hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick in response to her touch. She had work to do herself today. The vegetable garden needed planting, and she wanted to get seeds in the ground while the weather held. It would be good to have fresh vegetables come summer, especially with a new baby to care for. She spent the morning working the soil, planting seeds in careful rows. It was peaceful work, meditative. She liked the feel of dirt on her hands, liked knowing she was creating something that would sustain them. This was what life was supposed to be: simple, purposeful, filled with small daily tasks that added up to something meaningful. By midday, Margaret was tired and ready for a rest. She went inside, made herself some tea, and sat in the rocking chair Elijah had built. She opened the book she was reading, a novel borrowed from Mrs. Patterson, and lost herself in the story. She must have dozed off, because she woke to the sound of horses outside. Multiple horses. Margaret set the book aside and went to the window, her heart beginning to race. 3 men were dismounting near the barn. Men she did not recognize. They had a rough look about them, guns on their hips worn low and easy. Fear spiked through her, cold and sharp. Elijah was miles away. She was alone. Margaret grabbed the rifle from above the mantel and checked that it was loaded. Her hands shook slightly, but she steadied them with effort. She had learned to shoot, had practiced, but she had never actually had to defend herself. She prayed she would not have to start now. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready, but not aimed. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader of the 3, a man with a scar across his cheek and cold eyes, smiled without warmth. "We're looking for Elijah Chambers. Heard he lives here." "My husband isn't home," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady. "If you want to leave a message, I'll tell him you came by." "Your husband," the man repeated, looking her up and down with obvious assessment of her pregnant condition. "Well now, seems Chambers has been busy. That's fine. We can wait for him to get back." "You can wait in town," Margaret said firmly. "This is private property. I'll thank you to leave." The man's smile faded. "Now that's not very hospitable. We rode a long way. Least you could do is offer us some water. Maybe a bite to eat while we wait." "I said leave." Margaret raised the rifle, pointing it at the man's chest. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady now. "I won't ask again." The man studied her for a long moment, weighing his options. Then, He nodded slowly. All right, ma'am. No need for trouble. But you tell Chambers that Wade was here. Tell him we need to talk about his time in the cavalry. About something that happened at the Little Big Horn. Tell him we know what he did. And we want to be compensated for our silence. Margaret's blood ran cold. They were blackmailers. Or worse. I'll tell him you came by, she said, refusing to show fear. Now get off my land. The three men mounted up slowly, deliberately. Wade tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. We'll be back, Mrs. Chambers, real soon. And next time, your husband better have an answer for us. They rode away at a leisurely pace, making it clear they were not intimidated by one pregnant woman with a rifle. Margaret stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Then she rushed inside and locked the door. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, shaking with delayed reaction. What had Wade meant about the Little Big Horn? What had Elijah done? And why had he never mentioned it? Margaret forced herself to breathe slowly, to calm down. Whatever it was, whatever Elijah might have done during the war, she would face it with him. They were partners. She had meant those words. She would not abandon him over something in his past, not without hearing his side of it. But fear gnawed at her. Fear for Elijah, fear for their baby, fear for the life they had built that suddenly felt fragile. Elijah returned just before sunset, as he had promised. Margaret was waiting on the porch, and he knew immediately that something was wrong. He was off his horse in seconds, climbing the steps to her. What happened? Are you all right? Is the baby? We're fine, Margaret said quickly. But we had visitors. 3 men. The leader called himself Wade. He said they wanted to talk to you about the Little Big Horn, about something you did there. He said they know and want to be compensated for their silence. Elijah's face went pale, then hard. He looked away, jaw clenched. Damn it. I hoped that would never catch up to me. What is he talking about? Margaret asked. What happened at the Little Big Horn? Elijah sat down heavily on the porch step, suddenly looking older, weary. It was 1876, he began quietly. I was with the cavalry, but not with Custer. We were part of the reinforcement that arrived too late. After the battle, we were supposed to help round up survivors, assess the damage, but there were also orders to confiscate anything valuable. Indian artifacts, personal effects of the fallen soldiers. Some of the men took more than they should have, including me." End quote. He paused, rubbing his face. There was a ceremonial lance, belonged to one of the Lakota chiefs. It was valuable, not just because of the materials, but because of what it represented. I took it. I told myself it was following orders, that I was a soldier doing my duty. But the truth is, I took it because I wanted it. Because I thought I deserved some compensation for what I'd seen, what I'd survived. Margaret sat beside him, listening without judgment. Years later, after I mustered out, I learned that the lance was supposed to go to a museum. There was a scandal about missing artifacts. Wade and his men, they were part of my unit. They know I took it. They've been tracking me, waiting for the right time to bleed me dry. Margaret took his hand. Do you still have it? Hidden in the barn. I couldn't sell it. It felt wrong. But I couldn't return it either, without admitting what I did. Then we return it, Margaret said firmly. We do the right thing now. Together. Elijah looked at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. You're not angry? Disgusted? You made a mistake. A long time ago. You've carried the guilt ever since. That's punishment enough. She squeezed his hand. We fix this. We return the lance to the tribe it belongs to. We tell the truth. And we face whatever consequences come. Together. Relief flooded Elijah's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. We deserve each other. Margaret pulled back to look at him. Partners, remember? In everything. Even this. Over the next week, they made arrangements. Elijah contacted tribal leaders through the Indian agent, explaining what he had and wanting to return it. The response came quickly. The lance was indeed precious, a sacred object that belonged to the tribe. They would accept its return with gratitude and no legal action. Wade and his men came back, expecting money. Instead, they found the territorial marshal waiting with Elijah and Margaret. Blackmail was a crime, and Wade had made the mistake of putting his threats in writing when Elijah had pretended to negotiate. The three men were arrested and taken away. That evening, as the sun set over the prairie, Elijah and Margaret stood on their porch. The crisis was over. The lance would be returned. Wade was in custody. Their future was secure. Thank you, Elijah said softly, for standing by me, for not judging me. We all make mistakes, Margaret replied. What matters is what we do after. You did the right thing in the end. We did the right thing, Elijah corrected. I couldn't have done it without you. Margaret leaned back against him, feeling his solid warmth, his steady strength. That's what marriage is. Facing things together. Being stronger together than we could ever be alone. I love you, Margaret Chambers. More than I have words to say. I love you too. And our baby loves you. Feel that? She placed his hand where the baby was kicking vigorously. Elijah's face lit with wonder, as it always did when he felt their child move. Strong. Just like the mother. They stood together as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the land they had built a life on. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges ahead, Margaret knew. Life on the frontier was never easy, but they would face everything together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had found each other when they needed it most. The baby kicked again, and Margaret smiled. Their family was growing. Their love was strong. And the ranch that had brought them together would be the foundation for generations to come. The days passed in peaceful routine as spring deepened into early summer. Elijah built a cradle for the baby, working in the evenings by lamplight, while Margaret sewed tiny clothes. They talked about names, about hopes and dreams for their child, about the legacy they would leave. On a warm June evening, Margaret went into labor. Elijah rode for Mrs. Patterson and the midwife, then paced the porch while the women worked. Hours later, he was called inside to meet his daughter. She was tiny and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and her mother's eyes. She's beautiful, Elijah whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held her for the first time. You're both beautiful. Margaret, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him. We did good. We did. Elijah carefully placed the baby in Margaret's arms, then sat beside them on the bed. His family, his whole world in this moment. What should we name her? Hope, Margaret said without hesitation. Because that's what you gave me. Hope for the future. Hope for happiness. Hope that it was possible to love again. Hope Chambers, Elijah said, testing the name. It's perfect. That night, after the midwife and Mrs. Patterson left, Elijah sat in the rocking chair with Hope cradled against his chest. Margaret watched from the bed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This man who had appeared in her life when her wagon broke down, who had been patient and kind and steady, who had shown her that love was worth the risk. He was a good man. He would be a good father. Elijah, she said softly. He looked up, his expression tender. Thank you. For everything. For finding me that day. For loving me. For giving me this life. This family. This happiness. You gave me the same, Elijah replied. We saved each other, Margaret. That's what love does. As dawn broke over the Montana prairie, the new family rested together. The ranch was quiet, the world peaceful. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had built something lasting and true. And now, they had created new life, a testament to the love that had grown from a chance meeting on a dusty trail. Margaret thought about that broken wagon wheel, about how she had been so determined to manage alone. If it had not broken, if Elijah had not found her, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the things that seemed like disasters were really blessings in disguise. Sometimes breaking down was the first step toward building something better.